In this episode, get great pronoun support, either being taken from the same place as the chat extension mentioned here, or from full custom pronouns. Either way, you get to look at some example pronouns that are tied into what are being used. We can do a combination of pronouns. So if you have people that have he, them, but prefer the he, him pronoun set, then we can set it this way. And finally, we can reset the settings that have been custom, either from the user or mod themselves, to go back to either the default gender neutral or the ones that have been set. Hello and welcome to Streamer Bot Bytes, where I cover how to set up and to make the most of the awesome Streamer bot. There is one video per topic to make it easy as possible to follow and find. When relevant, sample import code will be provided to make it even easier for you to get started and to add functionality to your stream. So let's get started with the topic for this video. So to start to set up the pronoun support, browse to the link in the video description of the code import. Select all the content, copy, then go into the Actions tab in StreamerBot and right click on the left hand pane, select Import and paste the string there. This is going to paste 18 separate actions into the bot. Thankfully, whilst there are more actions here in version 2, there's less setup that we need to do. In the main engine action, this is the only action we need to add in references to get it to work. And it does remind you those at the top in the comments. So the first one is system.dll. You can see up here. And the second one is system.net.dll. If you prefer, you can copy and paste this. You can then compile, make sure it's compiling successfully, then save and compile. Whilst not required, it's highly recommended to use the first words action to fetch a viewer's pronouns. This means then it's cached for later on in the time that they may chat into the channel. So to set this up, you need to go to Settings, Settings, Events, then General, and in the first words, you can select the add-in for Redeemer or first words. Now, if you have a welcome message already, you can add an action to call on action. So for example, in this welcome message here, we could add in an action at the top, always recommend the top, to run the add-in code there. Next, we need to set up 6 commands. Now these all reference the pronouns command sections here. We need to add those in. We're going to create a group name, pronouns commands. Pick one at a time. So example pronouns. This actually isn't required for the pronoun system, but it's a really good way to show viewers what they can do with the responses that they have available. And you probably want to cool down on that because it's a user command. Next up, we're going to have the pronouns override. So this is a command that will allow viewers to set the full custom pronouns. Again, you'll want to cool down on that. Next, you want the mods version of the pronouns override, so mod pronouns override. And it's a mod command to make sure the permissions are set. You probably don't want to have a cooldown for that. Next, we want to have the command to reset the custom pronouns. So this is the user level one first, so pronouns reset. Again, I want to cool down so it's not spammed. After this, we've got the mod pronoun reset. So this is where moderators can reset a target user's pronouns that have been custom set. So if they've been set wrong, then moderators can change those back. Again, moderator permission on this command. No cooldown need to be selected. Then finally, we can add in the pronouns command. So this has two uses. It will either show the pronouns of yourself, but if you then specify a user afterwards, it will then show the other user's pronouns. You might want to smaller cooldown this one because you may want to use it on yourself and then for a recipient user. So a few seconds is probably wise there. Now let's go through 3 examples of where we're going to get an action that's been set before. I'm going to look at how to upgrade it. So the first one is happy. This gets the target information from the input to make sure that a valid user is specified. It does with these checks. Then we have the user redeems it, tells the person that's the target user that they are happy. Now see, they and are gender neutral, it's generally acceptable, but we can be really clever now with the pronoun support to really personalize this. So if we go to the web page, which is linked also in the description below, we can use this table here first to or 2 tables. Top one here to look at what variable to use, but the second one is generally the easiest one to look at. Now, if we look at the not set at the bottom, so we looked at they are happy, so they are is here. We can see that it's in column A and column G. So we need to have, so they and are happy. Now they are in the middle of a sentence. So that means we need the response to be all lowercase. So column A is pronoun subject lower, and G is pronoun current tense lower. So they, and then are, little g, copy that across. So % either side of what you want to use in the word. You need to put the correct spacing, so there's a space between those words there, and space between the words that precede and succeed it. So that's what we need to change in the messages we're sending out. What you need to do before any messages are sent out is we add an action. Now, this one we are talking about the user rather than the target. So that's the redeemer of the action. So you need to look at each time we're using it. So we need to add an action, actions, and action again. And then we need to say the redeemer. We select that. And we can see there, put that above. So we get the pronouns for the redeemer. We can then use them in a message. Our next example is going to be for a hug. Again, very similar, we're getting target information, doing a validation. But the message this time is we're going up to a target user and you hug them. Now obviously them is the gender neutral part, which we can then change. So it could be hugs her, hugs him, and many other options. So let's have a look in the table again. Again, looking at them here, get B for the pronoun option, which is object. And again, it's going to be lower. If we wanted it to start with a capital T, it would be pronoun object, but because it's all lowercase, the word, we use pronoun object lower. So percent, pronoun object lower percent, and we end the sentence with a full stop. We can then add in the action. This time, because we're talking about the target, we use add in for the target. Again, make sure that action has been run before the message is sent. And finally, we're going to take the scenario when actually a redeem or a target isn't actually specified, so it's not a target as part of a command. For example, a timed action. So if you want a timed action to share with the stream, the streamer's pronouns themselves, you can hard code this and put the streamer's pronouns are he, him. But what we can do is we can use a variable pronoun on its own. Now, to be able to use this, we need to use an add-on, which is much like before, but for the pronoun user variable. So with this, we can do a logic set argument, and we give the variable name pronoun user, and then give the name. So give you vrflad, and again, we need action. This time, we're going to select the pronoun user variable. So this could be used, for example, if you want to do shout outs to your mods in your channel. You can set the variable, call the action, then do the shout out, and repeat that until all your mods have been shouted out. And then you can, in the shout out message, you can customize it with pronouns. And then we just need to put the argument here above the action, and obviously the message at the bottom. So it gets the argument, gets the pronouns, then it runs a message. Now we can test the commands. So just for using pronouns on its own, we get to see the current pronouns, he, him. But we can also check against other users. So we can select one of the mods on my channel, for example, and we can see that they are she, her. The example pronouns are working. We can use the hug command. So try and hug ourselves. We can see hugs him. And do happy. We do that against one of the mods. It's still saying that he is happy. But the hug command is going to look at the target's pronouns. So we can see here that they are all working well. Now if you want to override our pronouns from the ones that have been default set, what's probably the best thing to do is to go back to the reference again. Again, this is in the description below, so it's vrflad.com/pronouns.html. Now if you want to override to base it on something, for example, you can copy these entries. It copies and pastes quite well into chat. So the example I like to use is he, them. And some people that have he, them prefer the different pronoun languages as the he, him. So we can copy those and we'll put the he, them in there. So we can set pronouns override. And then put all the options you want in there. Now it's worth noting the S on the end is if you need an S on a letter of certain words. So for example, he feels or they feel is the correct language. So that's why we have the S there. So you can use that variable on the end. Now if we set the pronouns custom, you can see it's acknowledging the main pronoun. So if you go example pronouns, you can see that they haven't changed because they are still the he, him. Now let's have a look at the mod override commands and the mod reset. Let's reset first actually. Okay. Pronouns, reset. Now this is gone back to he, him. Let's show off the mod commands, of which there are two. The first one is where we can define pronouns for a target user. For this I'm going to pick a different example. We're just going to use the default here. So this means that you don't need to rely on any service. You can just define them yourself, or you can customize any of these options, much like the users can. So mod pronoun override. Or pronouns, sorry, needs to be plural there. The target user. So I'm going to use this on myself, but it'll work on myself just as it would for any other target user. Let me paste in the options there. We can change any of these here. And again, they copy and paste from a table on the website really easily. And it's now showing those. Now if I can use the example pronouns, you can see the example sentences are using those pronouns set. And finally, mod pronouns reset with the user. If we don't specify it, it will tell us. And it's going to reset it back, and it's picked up again as he, him. And finally, an optional part where I'm going to go through the main parts of the pronoun code. So the first one is the main engine for the pronouns. Apart from references up here, it pulls out the pronoun user into the username field. Make sure it's a lowercase, so we're always accessing the service or setting variables with that lowercase name. We pull out a pronoun update, which by default, if it's not picked out, is 1. So this is a time comparison that we use. Again, we try and pull out another variable called force. This means if that is set, it's going to do a force update. We'll check that in a moment. We get the current time in a number format. For the day is like a number, so each day the number increases. We remove 6, which means we'll keep the pronouns for a week before we check again. But again, we've got the reset commands. The reset command will do the force check. So we check the date. If the date is more than 6 days in the past, we'll do a check since it's now been checked. Otherwise, we'll check if the force has been set. We then create a HTTP client object to build up a request to go to the web page here, which was going to get us a response. This is JSON response of the pronouns. We do some checks. If we hit the fail, if it fails, it will then trigger a fail state. Now this is needed if there's problems with the response. If it does not respond in time, so there's a timeout of 5 seconds, so 3 seconds up here. Sometimes it takes longer than that. And what happens is we need to handle that. So if we don't handle that state, so if it's not failed, we can say we've got an update as of the current time, so we know not to check again for another week. Then we pull out the pronoun ID from here. Otherwise, we say we don't have a pronoun set. We then look at the responses. So it's he, him. If so, we define things. And for each of the responses, we define all the user variables. So the user is tied with all the settings so it can be cached and reused. So we don't need to go and create this every time. So this should only run once per week by default. So once we've finished that connection, all these values that are being set here for the relevant pronouns, we put in arguments, and these are what are pulled out into the sentences that you build. So these are all the different options we have available. So we finally set those. So just to recap, key points here, the pronoun user. We'll see this being referenced a few times. The force as well. So the arguments, if it's been set to false, we pull that in and then we compare it to true. So the add-ins are the next one that's useful. And that just runs the main engine. Because for this use, we need to have the pronoun user set. For a target, we make sure we have a valid target, otherwise we give a message advising of that. Then we set the pronoun user to the target user, and then we run the main engine. The redeemer, or the first words, we set the pronoun user to be whoever's called it, and then run again the main engine. We have examples here, which pulls in the redeemer because it's about the redeemer. And we can see here a bunch of the pronoun options being used across multiple sentences. The override default. This runs some different code. Now this will take all the inputs. If you don't specify them, it'll give you an example and point you at the web page of where to go to check them out. We then define the variables from the input, lowercasing some and some having the uppercase first letter. The last one if it's an S or not, so that's the option where we have feel or feels for he feels or they feel, for example. And then we define the user variables with those. We also set the pronoun update to a very large value, which means we're never going to check the servers again. We check the time in the other commands in the main engine. This is much the same, but what we do here is we get the username from the target user. And the input 8, for example, means there's 9 elements added after the command. And so they're all offset because you need to specify the username before the variables. So whereas the pronoun override, you'd go straight to the he, him, his, himself, was, is, and the s. We have another element there, so you will check for the number of values in there correctly. And again, setting those values much the same. The reset commands are actually very simple. We can have these just setting the false to true, again the username to be the current user. We then run through that. We then check if its pronoun has been set or if it's got the manual override, and then define the pronouns registered. Mods, again very similar, but we use the target information from input. So that's the pronoun user is target user. So you can see it's either current user for this one or the mods is target. The pronouns command checks if you have a specified a name after the command. We run the other pronouns command. We do the redeemer option here because it's about yourself. If it's nothing, we say it's not being set. If it's the custom one, we do a custom message there. This is much the same, but we are pulling target. So if we just pull that from there, so we add in target, and we handle the messaging accordingly. And these are just messages for failing that just give us reporting in the chat. Please like and subscribe to be notified of more videos like this. If there's a topic you'd like covered, please do let me know in the comments or on Discord. Check out my Twitch stream to see the bot in action and for other examples. The links to my Twitch, social media and to StreamerBot can be found at vrflad.com. Additional links to others that provide StreamerBot content can be also found in the description. Finally, thank you Nate for making a great bot, and please consider supporting his Patreon, which is linked from streamer.bot.